Good afternoon, and welcome to another semester of the CERIAS Security Seminar. This year, for the first time, we'll be broadcasting and holding these seminars on Wednesday afternoons. Traditionally, we've done these on Fridays, but that proved to be an obstacle for many of our speakers and some of our attendees. So we've moved them to Wednesday to have a better turnout and to be able to bring a program that more people can gain from. As in previous semesters, we will be advertising these on the web page. There will be an abstract, a bio, and other information about each of our speakers up on the web page as far in advance as we can provide it. Some of our speakers are speakers of opportunity that we get them to come to the seminar sometimes just days before. So keep an eye open for that. This program is broadcast on the web as well as on the Indiana Higher Education television system. So it's obtainable from a number of different mechanisms. Today's speaker joins us from Texas, where he has spent a considerable amount of his time. Dr. John Reel is with Veridian Corporation, formerly with Trident Data Systems. His career has taken him to a number of very interesting types of jobs, including spending a number of years with the National Security Agency and most recently with Trident and with Veridian in charge of their information systems, information security program in Texas. Veridian is one of the corporate sponsors of CERIAS, and John has long been involved with us as a representative on our board, as a friend of the program, and has done a lot of work with our students and with our faculty. And so please join me in welcoming today's speaker, Dr. John Reel.
Good afternoon. As you'll see on our slides, the title of my speech today, or talk today, is going to be the future of information security technologies. That's a very broad subject. I'm not going to cover the whole subject, of course. What I'm going to talk about is from the perspective of my company and the way we're looking at the business and the customer sets that we're looking at. So you're going to see a narrowed down version of that as we go through the talk today. If you have any questions as we go through the talk, please let me know and let us square them away. I would like to keep this relatively informal as we can as we go through this thing. What we're going to talk about first of all is what I consider to be the pressing technology issue that we in industry, and it's clear from my visits here to Purdue and to other campuses, you're facing that also. Then we'll go through and set the stage with a look at some of the network technology trends that we're observing. If we're going to go in and secure network infrastructures, we need to kind of understand where those infrastructures are going before we start talking about the security implications of that. Then we'll look at the state of information security technology. Where are we today so we can establish a baseline for the vector where we're going tomorrow. Then we're going to look at three different trends that are affecting us and a lot of the industry. And I'll close with a couple of killer applications, things that I would like the academic community to really be thinking about. A couple problems, if we can solve them, we can make a big difference in the way people do work. Which I believe is the end goal of security, is to enable people to do work the way they need to and to remove barriers from that. So let's just roll in. The biggest issue that we face in industry today, in any technical field, especially the security field, is people, getting enough people that are qualified to do the work. If you look at this, one of the things that we see is we're really seeing real complications today in the age of specialization. I'm not that old. But when I entered the industry in 1986, I graduated from college, people were still hiring computer scientists. You know, and there was a certain amount of specialization. You would hire a database guy, or you would hire an operating systems guy maybe, or an applications person. But that was as much specialization really as there was at the time. Occasionally there was a certain specialization between IBM people and DEC people and stuff like that, but not much. You know, but today, you know, what do? We go out and hire an Oracle guy, or we hire an NT guy, or we hire a checkpoint firewall person. So we're getting very specialized. So that limits our ability to go out and just take a person from the general pool of technically qualified people. That causes us, our recruiters, tremendous problems. So specialization is killing us from that perspective. The other big thing that we're seeing is a rapidly shrinking labor pool. I just saw a study that concluded in January of 2000. Today, there are 843,000 open technical positions in this country alone. That's half of the technical positions in the country are open right now, unfilled. That bodes well for you when you get out of school, but it doesn't bode well for guys like me who have to staff projects. And the trend is getting worse. We're looking at about 130 or 40,000 new jobs per year in this career field, just in information technology in general. U.S. schools are graduating about 24,000 a year, and up until this past year or so, that's been declining at a rate of about 4% a year. So we have fewer graduates, more jobs, which is not helping us at all. There, by 2004, we could easily see 1 million unfilled IT jobs. Despite taking a lot of people and cross-training them into the field, we're going to see a lot more jobs. If IBM hired every graduate this year from every university in the country, they still wouldn't meet their recruiting goals. So that causes problems for people like me that have to look at trends and have to think about, 3 and 5 years from now, what are we doing? This is just a graphic to show you where some of those openings are as you look across the way. Again, extrapolating the trend. When you start looking at those implications in the security field, people who are specializing in the security industry, from 1997 to 1998, for example, there was a 64% increase in IT staff that were dedicated to security functions. So demand is going up greatly for people with the skills that you're learning here. From 89 to 98, in that 10-year span, there was a 300% increase in that demand. You can see the growth rates at different companies. The fact is, demand is increasing out of proportion to demand for the normal IT field, is the point I'm getting to. But we're not meeting that demand academically. You have one of the largest and best programs in the country here, and you graduated 4 people with master's degrees with a security specialization last year. So that's why we're involved, is to help increase that number of graduates, to help people like Dr. Spafford move more people through this program so that we can use you, frankly. Now, the state of networking, what are we looking at here? Our position is that the field in general is maturing. TCP/IP is a trusted, robust environment. Trusted in the sense that we trust it to perform, not trusted from a security perspective yet. I saw you, Gene. Enterprise management of networks is reality. People are doing that today. It's not a panacea, it's not perfect, but it's happening today. Okay. By trusted in TCP/IP environments, we're working with NASA right now to allow scientists to control their experiments that are on the space shuttle or onboard satellites from their desktop at their university. I don't know if you're aware, but presently what they have to do is go to Johnson Space Center or someplace like that to control their experiments, or have the astronauts take time away from their job while they're on station to tend to those experiments, to modify the parameters or to record data or whatever. So we're working to create a secure data link through the internet to allow scientists to do that using the internet and TCP/IP. So it's a reliable environment, or it's reliable enough for business to trust it to get business done. The science, if you will, or the application of network design, network implementation, operations is pretty well understood. It's a fairly repeatable process right now. 5 years ago, that was not nearly so much the case. So this environment is getting relatively stable. The physical plan's in place, and there's good capacity in there. We have a lot of room to grow, as you'll see in just a second on another slide. Lots of vendor support. The biggest improvements that I've noticed lately being the last year or two, are on-ramp speed and throughput of the network. That's where everybody's focused right now. Let's get more people connected. That's where the revenue's at, get more people connected, and let's move more data through in preparation for bigger and bigger graphics files and stuff like that. Security is becoming a concern, but it's still not a driver in networks that we're seeing in most applications. This is just a piece of data I gathered to demonstrate how quickly throughput speed in the network is ramping up. Up until 1997, the backbone speed was doubling every 22 months. Now it's doubling every 6 months. And it's got to do that because the demand is doubling that fast. So what you're seeing is a lot of stuff moving over the network. Now, I borrowed this from Bill Cheswick, who does these internet maps. And basically this is color-coded to the different domains that are out there. And my point of putting this on there is he does this map every day. 30% of the routes in the internet change on a daily basis, is what he's found in his studies, at least the last time I read. This map is about a year old, and it reflects 80,000 networks connected to the internet. There's probably 160,000 networks connected to the internet right now. So what we're doing is we're dealing with a very complex environment when you talk about laying security on top of that environment. What are the remaining gaps? Of course, more speed and more volume for moving data through, but what we're seeing, as I'm sure you're witnessing, people want to put voice and video. We want to move to total media, not just multimedia, where we can pump anything that anyone desires over the network in a reliable manner. What that portends, one is reliable, irrefutable, common authentication. So wherever you're at on the network, you can get authenticated and be able to do your job. You're also going to need quality of service in that network, because we've sort of adapted to the TCP/IP environment where there's not really trusted delivery, and the packets can get there in about any order that they want, and all the applications have dealt with that. Well, now we're moving into an environment where the applications can't compensate for that anymore. So the network's going to have to provide some significant quality of service characteristics. And what we're seeing in working new protocols, that's where a lot of the development's going, that's where a lot of the investment's going to be going, we believe. Final convenience factors, getting rid of wires, cables, and cords. That has a lot of security implications when people are doing things with infrared or very short distance wireless types of capabilities. Truly mobile network access and privileges. So when I come up here, I'm authenticated on my network back home, for example. We talked about multimedia. So now we move into what do we have to do from a security perspective to operate in this new environment. That's what we're looking at next. First, the bad things about the state of security, if you will. The field really hasn't matured yet, and it may not, because we're always playing catch up to the changes in the network environment and the changes in the operating system environment. There are a lot of things are happening, good things are happening here, a couple of other universities, trying to mature this field and put us on a more scientific basis and inject at the beginning, at the design level of products, security thinking and security concepts before those roll out. But we have a long ways to go there, and that's my contention here. There is no such thing today as enterprise level management of the security enterprise. And where I'm headed with that is you can't take a network with 50 or 100,000 sensors and have a few people in a room monitoring those sensors in an intelligent manner right now and reacting to issues that those sensors bring to those guys. You can't, in the middle of an I love you virus attack or a distributed denial of service attack, raise the paranoia level in your network from a centralized location. There's no way to push that out and enforce that new policy into your network today. That's a place that we need to go. Virtually all standards from a security perspective that we're seeing are vendor specific also. There are a few standards that are starting to coalesce. The PKI world is one area where they seem to be making progress on some standards that are being adopted by industry. There are standards out there, but few are actually being adopted. The PKI world is grasping for standards, and I think they're latching onto some maybe before they're even ready. But that's the only area that we see standards coming together real well that are going to help us. The thing that concerns me a lot in the security industry is most solutions are getting very complicated. You know, hundreds of thousands and millions of lines of code for a piece of security. Now the security of the security piece becomes a concern. I'm a huge advocate in simple security and simple mechanisms. You get that through better design, and maybe you get that through using extra layers rather than using embedded security that I'll talk about in just a minute. But the complexity of it worries me, because the more complicated it is, the more difficult it's going to be to gain any sort of assurance of the security of the solution. The perimeter security approach is completely inadequate. You know, if there are perimeters in the network, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, you can't trust that that's the only piece of your network. And most of the solutions that are on the market today rely on the fact that you have a definable perimeter, and you can't start with that level of trust, I believe. Louder? Okay. Finally, the world is far more complicated than just TCP/IP. And most of the solutions that you see on the marketplace are TCP/IP oriented. You see a few people getting serious about security. For example, the wireless applications protocol has some security stuff. You also see people with the cell phone industry is pretty serious about security because they're worried about fraud. Other than that, you don't see people sweating security in SCADA systems, for example, building control and that kind of stuff. Security in systems that are controlling things like oil refineries or elevator systems or water distribution systems. Security is not a factor there yet. We're not talking about security there. My contention is we should be able to abstract a lot of the security that we're putting in the TCP/IP environment into those environments, but we're not thinking in those terms yet, and so that's something that we're very interested is moving some research into some of those areas and thinking about problems in ways we can solve problems in several different domains. And finally, the last bad thing, and I'm sure you guys are very aware of that, the judicial system is terribly ill-equipped at the moment to deal with the cybersecurity problem, especially on an international basis. The United States is doing far better than they used to do even a year or two ago, but from the perspective of tracking and finding and convicting criminals, we are woefully behind the state of technology, which is the judicial system is designed to stay, a couple of decades behind the state of technology, and that's how it's supposed to be. But internationally, we have a lot of work to go yet in being able to bring people, have them pay for the damage and pain that they create. The good thing, I contend we have most of the building blocks that we need today to create tremendous levels of trust in our systems. We need to do a lot of work to integrate them and to export some of those into other environments, but the conceptual framework is there, we believe, to do a lot of stuff to move us to the 90% solid solution area. Most of security, in our experience, is not technology driven right now. By doing good training, by implementing good policies, by defining for your community of users what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, will move an organization way down the road towards securing their enterprise and being able to protect and provide a certain level of assurance. So that's one of the things that we preach, is that before you start installing firewalls, teach your people what is right and what is wrong, because usually when an employee is violating the policy, it's because they're not even aware of the policy. At least that's been our experience. Real standards are starting to appear. Talked about those in the PKI arena and some in the intrusion detection arena as well. And something that I think is really important and has been somewhat overlooked, we have CPU power now within our reach to encrypt everything in the network if we choose to. There is spare CPU power on most desks in this country right now. That wasn't the case even 2 years ago. So we have space now for a fundamental paradigm shift in what we're doing in networks. We also have space and capacity to do much more host-based security than we ever had before. Host-based security was the first approach that a lot of people took quite a few years ago, and largely it was abandoned, I believe, because there wasn't room on the platform for that. It got squeezed out because people needed the memory and they needed the hard disk space and they certainly needed the processor to do the business that they bought the computer for, not to sit there and crunch for security. So I think we have CPU power and RAM and disk space and all that good stuff to do a lot of things that we couldn't do 5 or 6 or 8 years ago. Things I'm not so sure about, what are the implications of IP version 6 or IPVN, assuming that we have a new standard coming out before IP6 really gets rolled out everywhere. What are the implications of that in the security community? I know there are a lot of hooks in IPv6 and the other versions that have been discussed. How are people going to use them? What is that going to do to us? Are we going to build that into our applications or not? And I'm not prepared to predict what's going to happen there yet. Just because it has the capacity to do cool things for us in the security world doesn't mean we're going to take advantage of those. Something that is very important to me is a question that I ask routinely: is built-in security good enough? I used to be of the school of thought that if we if Microsoft would only get their act together and start from scratch with an operating system, or any company, Microsoft, Sun, you name it, start with a blank sheet of paper and build in security from the start, that would be good enough. And if they built it on a really solid security model, we could secure systems very well. I've come to the decision that that's probably A, unrealistic, it's never going to happen, but B, it's probably impractical from the perspective of securing 30 million lines of code, even if you start from scratch, is a daunting challenge. And even if you get it real efficient and cut it back to 18 million lines of code, it's still a heck of a thing to secure. So what I'm advocating, and we're going to talk about it a little later, I think, in this talk, is maybe we need to take a step back and do security a little bit differently. Maybe instead of securing an object and embedding security within that object, maybe we create a shell of security around that object. Maybe we use appliances to insulate our network entities from the network and to manage the security of everything coming in and out of that device from a network perspective, not from an operating system perspective. Maybe that's an approach. We shrink the perimeter, we shrink that security perimeter. Perimeter security is something we're pretty good at. We understand that problem. We shrink the perimeter down to one specific device in the network or one specific subnet so that we can manage it and tailor it and provide a solution much more customized to the needs of that area of the network. So that's something we're putting a lot of thought in, actually. Finally, as a company, we're very worried about are the projections for the security market accurate, even within an order of magnitude? And I'll talk about that more. We do a lot of work in the defense industry. It's a big concern of ours. There are big budgets out there. Those budgets aren't materializing always. They haven't for the last 2 or 3 years. We're still holding our breath for this year to see how that happens. Is it going to come through so we can help places like you do more and more research? Okay, first trend I want to talk about today is that the federal government cares. They officially care about this problem. It started in the mid-90s with, I don't know how many of you have heard about an exercise called eligible receiver. That's really when the government started carrying a person within the Defense Department that had a lot of initiative and oomph behind him, sent 15 or 20 NSA engineers out to test the security of the DoD's networks. And basically the charge he gave them is, you are North Korea, you want to attack South Korea, and you don't want the United States to be able to respond. Use only open source tools from the network, use no intelligence sources for information, and see what you can do. Over the course of about 7 or 10 days, I believe, this wily band of hackers managed to get to the point where the referees agreed they could take down the majority of the power grid in the western United States. They had infiltrated a number of classified communication systems. They could take Pacific Command, which is the piece of the military that's responsible for Japan and Hawaii and Korea that would be responding to this. They could take their communications capability completely off the air and keep it off the air for more than 24 hours. So this exercise really scared the government. What they did is they stood up the President's Commission for Critical Infrastructure Protection. They issued their report in like 1996, I believe. That report estimated that $7 billion in R&D would be needed just to develop technologies to secure our infrastructures. Infrastructures like the financial community networks, like our power grids, our water distribution systems, things like that. $7 billion just in R&D, and that doesn't count the interconnected and interrelated pieces of those infrastructures. My opinion is you need to add a zero to that figure to start talking about all those interdependencies and solving those types of problems. So basically the government said we need a hell of a lot of money to start solving this problem. They stood up the National Infrastructure Protection Commission, I think that's what that stands for, at the FBI, promised a $64 million budget and 125 people. I think they have between 65 and 80 people right now is about what they have running there. So we're not to that goal yet. DoD budgeted $3.6 billion after eligible receiver to fix those problems. That's a lot of money. I mean, that's a B. Didn't spend it all. For example, In fiscal year 1999, I heard Ken Minahan, who was director of NSA at the time, just retiring, give a speech, and he said that DOD, shortly after eligible receiver, had a $100 million budget increase at one point for the Defense Department. Not $1 of that went towards information security. So he was questioning how serious they were. My point is that all the money that's been budgeted hasn't completely made it to execution, and all the money that's being budgeted is not necessarily being targeted towards information security, even when they have room for it. So the President's 2001 budget, some of you may have heard a lot of splash about that. It made a lot of news. $2 billion for critical infrastructure protection. That's not new money. There were about $300 million in new money in that budget. This is where some of that went. What you see in that $2 billion, a lot of that money is going for things like Department of Transportation to replace X-ray system in airports. So it's security, and it's infrastructure security, but it's not cyber security, if you will, which is what we're most interested in. And what I thought I would do is take you through a very brief exercise in why this critical infrastructure thing scares the government and why they're talking about putting so much money and they're putting tremendous emphasis on it at the moment. If we started from the perspective of a Midwestern airport, major Midwestern airport, gets essentially shut down by a snowstorm of some sort. That's going to divert a lot of airplanes to another major Midwestern airport. But within that same time frame, this airport suffers a telephone outage. So they can't communicate. Now what happens when you have a telephone outage around an airport? The radar sensors are connected to the radar people by telephone lines. When those switches go down, they can't see their radars anymore, so the radars just don't work. So they have to divert all their aircraft somewhere else, say down to Texas, to DFW, where I'm from. Now, if they were to have a brownout in that same time frame, they would have to divert all of their aircraft somewhere. So what we've seen so far are three completely unrelated events that are causing a lot of aircraft to stack up on the eastern seaboard. Now, if we were to have also around this same time frame, and I'm talking about over a 12 or 18-hour time frame here, we could sustain these three outages. Okay, at least in airplane takeoff time, because it takes hours to recover when you start shifting airplanes around. A lot of airplanes in the New York area. Not very long ago, I was traveling when this happened. Had a small computer malfunction at the FAA. No airplanes could move up and down the eastern seaboard because they couldn't track them. What if that system had that same glitch again? All these airplanes would end up stacked up down in Atlanta somewhere. Then all I have to do is pop off one bomb in Atlanta and I can destroy a lot of airplanes, and I can create a significant emotional impact on the entire United States. Okay, now, let me back up. Every one of these is an unrelated incident. The thing that scares the government about this is that no one is in charge of seeing this happen. No one in the government is responsible for figuring out that, oh my gosh, all these airplanes are stacking up at just a few airports. Could someone be doing this on purpose? No one in this country is responsible for that, and then no one's responsible for reacting to it and telling the FAA, my gosh, you guys need to move airplanes somewhere else, or you guys need to beef up your physical security because something weird may be happening. And that scared the leaders of the country tremendously, and that's why you see this big push on critical infrastructure protection, because a bunch of unrelated events that are adding up to a disaster could occur at any time, and we wouldn't know about it until this happened. Next trend I want to talk about is vanishing perimeters. If there ever was a network perimeter, it's becoming more and more ill-defined and unrecognizable. I'm not sure there ever was. There was always the illusion of a perimeter, but I'm not sure there ever really was. It's happening due to business requirements. We're seeing VPNs and extranets and adding clients into our network beyond just extranets, and adding suppliers and uncontrolled dial-ups. People putting modems behind their firewalls, which is a big problem. Telecommuters, all this sort of stuff. You know, think about, and this is what I tell other businesses that I talk to, think about how many holes you're punching through your firewall. And this is where I was talking about shrinking the perimeter. You know, my big firewall sitting out there on my internet, you have to configure it to satisfy the needs of all those thousands of people behind your firewall. If we shrink the perimeter, we can configure it more tightly and only satisfy the needs of those few dozen people maybe behind my firewall if my perimeter protection is still a firewall. So that's why I think we need to shrink the perimeter a lot, which is where I'm going with this trend. The next thing you have to think about when you start shrinking the perimeter is how do you control the configurations on all those boxes? It's not so, you'd think it's not so bad to control the configuration on one computer that's serving as my firewall, or a series that are sitting right there in parallel controlling my firewall. That's, oddly enough, a hard thing to do in a major enterprise. But now if I'm going to distribute firewalls throughout my enterprise or some other device similar to a firewall, how do I control those configurations and push policy to them? Next trend, encryption everywhere, ubiquitous encryption. As I said, we have the CPU power to do that. What we're seeing is more and more network traffic. I haven't found a number. I've been looking for a number where someone may have done a study to see how much encrypted traffic is on the network and how much it's increasing. The numbers that I did find is a 20% growth per quarter in security certificates that are being issued. That's tremendous growth. I submit that we're nearing critical mass where far more traffic is going to be encrypted than is unencrypted in the network now. If you just look at SSL and all of the e-business is being conducted just using SSL and similar techniques. The VPN market in 2001 is going to be about $12 billion a year. That's a lot of encrypted traffic that those folks are going to be pumping through our backbone. The implications of that are tremendous. The entire internet was founded on open, unencrypted, text-based traffic largely. So all of our security paradigms, all of our maintenance and administration and troubleshooting and all that is based on using open text, unencrypted information where we can get some value from all of the embedded layers of the packets that are traveling across the network. So it has tremendous implications on how we keep the network running, how we configure it and maintain it, and how we secure it. It also is going to have huge impacts to the Intel community. They are, scared about this, frankly. The intelligence community, not Intel that makes chips. I'm sorry. Two killer applications I want to talk to you about. The first one are mobile network credentials and capabilities. I've been doing a lot of traveling over the past year and a half, and what I notice is a whole lot of people in airports carrying 10 or 15 pounds worth of electronic equipment with them everywhere. And when I sit there and watch them, except for Dr. Spafford who's carrying an Apple, most of them are carrying equipment that is almost exactly alike. Why couldn't that equipment be waiting on them at their airport? Okay? Or at their hotel room, or at where they're going to work. And they carry in their purse or billfold their network credentials that enable them to use a system securely and have a presence on their home network that they can trust or with the applications that they need. That's the killer application that I think we need to free America and the medical problems that we're causing by having people lugging these laptops around. We need to free them of this problem and allow people to carry their credentials with them without carrying 20 pounds of hardware with them. They carry those credentials on that 20 pounds of hardware right now. It ought not be so hard to abstract that into a smart key or biometrics or something that they can use and then architect a solution between them and their network that is trustable. So if we can move towards that, we can change the way America works and improve the country, improve business, and save businesses a lot of money because those laptops are awfully expensive and a lot of them get lost. We improve the whole security problem if we can stop people from getting laptops stolen in airports also. So that's my first killer app. If you do that, I'll invest in your IPO. Second one is, I talked about this a little earlier, enterprise management of the security domain. This is one where we're putting a lot of work as a company. We're putting some investment into it. And I've already alluded to the issue several times of how do I get insight into the state of security in my network? Where am I being probed? Where am I being attacked? Where do I have virus breakouts? And then how do I raise the paranoia level in my network, either in sections of my network, if particular pieces are being attacked, or overall in my network, if my enterprise is being attacked. If I'm DOD and I'm going to war, I want my network to be much more paranoid than in peacetime. How do I raise that level? I've got to be able to manage the entire security enterprise from a location. Maybe it's a virtual location. It doesn't have to be necessarily centralized, but I've got to be able to push policy across my network and raise that. And I can't do that until I get visibility and I can see what's going on across my network. So in order to do that, I need to look at much more than TCP/IP, for one thing. Very concerned about my telephone systems. I'm very concerned about my building control systems. What kind of damage could you do to the Pentagon in the middle of a war if you just shut off their water? That's attacking the county. That's not attacking the DOD. If you just shut off their water, how much could you damage our war effort? If you shut down their power point, you could damage it more, but that's a different story. Okay, if we do much more than TCP/IP, now we get a lot more network into the a lot more insight into the network infrastructure. We can use that again to feedback and provide better protection. I believe in order to properly visualize, we also have to break the geography paradigm. I show on my slide a geography paradigm. This is how we visualize networks today. I'll lay out the challenge to you. I've laid it out to a lot of people and we haven't solved it yet. To come up with a new way of thinking about networks. You know, near to me in a network is not down the block. Near to me in the network is a hop. You know, it really is irrespective of the geography. We need to think about these things differently because we need to roll in, if someone's attacking a node, what we need to do is communicate to the person that owns the job that that node's doing what that impact is going to be. So we have to roll a lot of factors in, and geography really doesn't play much from my perspective. So what do we really need? What are we as a company focusing on? What are we encouraging places like CERIAS to help us with? One, we preach a lot, and I haven't talked about this yet, refocus on protecting the mission. We're not protecting computers. You know, one of my company's big focuses is we do work that matters for customers that matter. You know, somewhere someone's making money with a computer system, or they're keeping someone alive at a hospital, or they're protecting this nation. We're protecting missions, not computers. I don't care if the computer disappears as long as I can still move the parts that I need to move to get an airplane flying, or as long as I can keep a patient alive and get the information I need to give him the proper medication, or if I can get an ambulance on its way to where it needs to go. That's the job. So one of the things that we preach to all of our people as we're training them is sacrifice a computer to save the mission if you have to. Think about the mission, you know, not the operating system. That's the first thing. Next, we need varieties of sensors and reporting technologies. We've had a fairly sterile sensor environment so far. We need to use every entity in the network as a sensor. We need information from printers and operating systems and routers and firewalls and intrusion detection systems and anything that's plugged into that network. We need a rich fabric of sensors out there so that we can get context in that network and understand better what's going on. When you put a sensor, you know, at your internet interface, he has a very limited view. It's like going out and watching 65 and seeing those cars that go by. And if you stop a car, you can make some guesses as to where he's going and what he's doing, but they're just guesses, you know. But if we have more sensors down the road, we can tell where he gets off so we know where he's really going. Have sensors up the road, we can tell where he came from better. We need a very rich sensor environment to provide more context so we can make better decisions with our intrusion detection and anomaly types of systems. We've talked extensively already about determining the system state. You know, how secure is my network? Where am I being attacked? What kinds of attacks are they? And then what can I do about them? And ways to visualize, you know, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of sensors out there and correlate the information amongst those. That also plays into enterprise level solutions. We talked about that a little bit. And we do need to put some work into securing the underlying technologies. We need more security features available to us in the protocols. Some of that work is happening. We certainly need to put more work into securing operating systems. And we need more secure messaging technologies. That's, you know, if you think about it, the internet is based on passing messages. Some of them are really short, some of them are really long, but they're all messages. We need maybe to think in that paradigm as well. We certainly need better policies and laws, more reflective of the state of technology. And finally, we need an information operations, information warfare, information security smart judiciary, judges and prosecutors who understand the implications of what's going on. Until a couple years ago, you were convicted of a crime based on the amount of computer time or electricity you were stealing by illegally using a computer. It had nothing to do with the implications of erasing a database that's irrecoverable to the company. So we're starting to get there, but we certainly need to move a lot further down that road. And finally, these are some web resources where you can go get that map, Bill Cheswick's map, or check out some of the government sources that I cite. In the paper, there's a very good paper, Current and Future Danger, a Computer Security Institute primer on computer crime and information warfare I cite down here. It gives you a lot of the statistics that I cite in this. Statistics might be useful for you as you write papers and do your research. Everyone else cites them, you may as well also. And I'll just leave that up on the screen, that's it. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
It seems that the killer app of like the having these computers in your hotel and airport and stuff to add so much lack of security than adding security, because you can authenticate yourself, but you have no clue. It's an untrusted system that you don't have the computers like saving all your files, or the company who runs that system is saving your files. It seems to add so much more security problems that.
Well, does it have to be an untrusted system? Could I carry with my security credentials a method for verifying that that system is secure and operating in a secure manner for me?
It just seems to create a lot of.
Could he give me some level of trust that he's going to be an honest broker? I didn't say it was easy. If it was easy, someone would have done it. But I think I could challenge that system, and I'm thinking in terms of a diskless workstation where my files would never be stored locally. Of course, they'd be in RAM somewhere. Could I challenge him to prove to me that I can establish a level of trust? You trust that telephone system when you pick it up and put your credit card number into it, that no one's listening downstairs? Could I not trust it enough to send email over it? Or maybe do a company proprietary memo over it? I think maybe you could. Could I trust it enough that I could do a tippy-top secret federal government national security document in there? Well, certainly not. But they don't carry laptops anyway, so I'm not worried about those guys. But that's exactly the problem. How do I let it tell me I can trust it? That's why it hadn't been done yet.
Well, thank you very much, John. Oops, wait, there's a question.
Yes, sir.
You're talking about a rich fabric of sensors for the network.
Yes, sir.
Do you and your company, in implementing something like that, do you pay attention to the anonymity problems that might arise with that kind of information availability to a centralized system?
Anonymity has huge implications on what you can do in security. And yes, I mean, we have to look at that as we're moving towards a sensor-rich environment. But if it's running around on the wire, anonymity is not as big a problem for us from a legal perspective. It can have certain social issues related to that, but it doesn't cause us legal problems. So how you employ those, there are a lot of implications absolutely to that. We have to be very cognizant of that.
That's it. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, sir.